All right, Shabbos, say good morning. So we are continuing in Mesillas Hashem today in Perek Yud Aleph. So the Ramchal, again, if you remember, in yesterday's Shir, discussed the concept, ultimately, again, of Shabbos. And how Shabbos is one of those areas in Halacha where there are multiple branches associated with it, and therefore, again, it's easy to transgress without even realizing. So the Ramchal writes as follows. He says, Umashe kasha ala amon shmiraso hu hashvisa min ha'esek. One of the hardest parts of Shabbos is refraining from engaging in business practices. Even talking about business. So we'll say the way the Navi phrases it is that even my dib or even my speech on Shabbos is supposed to be fundamentally different than my speech during the rest of the week, even the way that I talk. The principle is pretty much on Shabbos, anything you're not allowed to do, you're really also not allowed to be involved in, even speaking about. Or to even talk about it. Therefore, for example, on Shabbos, a person can't go and inspect his properties to see what he has to do for those properties tomorrow, even though he's not going to do anything today. But he can inspect it on Shabbos to see what he needs to do tomorrow. Or for that matter, again, to go ahead and prepare myself, let's say on Erev Shabbos, go to the edge of the city, so that right as Motzei Shabbos is finished, I can go to the bathhouse. Davar ploni es elamachar. So again, I'm about to say, the Ramchal is kind of bringing together a couple of different things here. First of all, he's talking about that not only can one not engage in business practices on Shabbos, but one can't even speak about business on Shabbos. In addition to that, one is not supposed to go out and make preparations for the weekday on Shabbos as well. To the point that a person shouldn't even say, when they're on Shabbos, tomorrow I'm going to do this. In other words, part of the sanctity of Shabbos is that Shabbos is reserved for itself and is not used as a preparatory day for weekday activities. So I can't engage in weekday activities on Shabbos, I can't speak about weekday activities on Shabbos, and I can't prepare for weekday activities on Shabbos. He says, I can't say I'm going to buy this item tomorrow. Anything like that. So Rabbi said this is the complicated piece of Shabbos. So there's of course the 39 malachas, there's the Isurei Daraisa, there's the Isurei D'Rabbanan, and then there are all of these different tentacles of Shabbos that are so easy to transgress. V'hinei adheina dibarti min k'tzas min hamitzos ma she'anu roem shebnei adam nichshalam behem al harov. So Ramchal says up until this point in time, we've spoken about the mitzvahs that we see that people often transgress without even knowing they're transgressing. We've gone through a pretty long list. We've spoken about arayos, immorality, gezel, theft, ma'achalos, asuros, forbidden food items. We've spoken about lashon hara, rechilos. Now we've spoken about Shabbos. And what we've seen is that there are so many details associated with each of these averos that often we transgress without even realizing that we've transgressed. And the truth is, every avera is like this. Every avera has multiple tentacle and appendages. Some of them more chamer, some of them less chamer. Remember again, what's the title of this chapter? This is the Midas Hanekiyos. So what's the goal? The goal is to be clean of sin. That's the goal. Now remember, what Ramchal is teaching us is, you can't be clean from sin if what? If you don't know what sin is. Right? In other words, if I don't know what I'm supposed to be clean from, I can't be cleansed. So the first step, of course, is understanding all of these different tentacles and appendages of sin. So now that I'm conscious of it, now that I'm aware of it, now I could take the necessary steps to try to avoid it. And if I have transgressed, take the necessary step to purge. The goal of Nikios is literally, again, to be cleansed of all of these different tentacles and appendages of sin. Kach Yisrael tznuah kshem mechames midyon. Rav Huna Rav Acha Amar shelo hiktim echad mehem tefillin shel rosh letefillin shel yad. Shelo hiktim echad lo haya Moshe mishabchon v'lo yosem misham b'shalom. So we'll say the Gemara. So the Ramchal gives examples from the Medrash in Shir HaShirim Rabbah, that before Moshe Rabbeinu led the army out to war against Midian, he wanted to make sure that they were nucky, that they were clean, that they were cleansed of sin. So Rabbi say, what's an example of being cleansed of sin? He made sure that no one put on their tefillin shal rosh before their tefillin shal yad. And you think to yourself, oh my gosh, if that was my life problems, right, how happy I would be. If that was, but the point Rabbi say is that's what Nikias is. The midah of Nikias is to reach a level where I am cleansed of any wrongdoing. Now, we read this and we think to ourselves, this sounds so beautiful. And then what's the next thing that goes through my mind? No way, right? Absolutely no way. Like pretty much like, I'm happy on any given day if I have not done an Isser Kares and Isser Misa, right? Like that's a good day. Or a lav. Now I will say this is such a level, but again, I will say remember, it's go big or go home. Like at the end of the day, if you don't shoot for the stars, right? If you don't set your goals up here, then what are you doing in life? So obviously, I will say what he's describing over here is something that is a really, really difficult stage to get to. But lamaisa, that's where I have to set my goals. That's my goal, is to be naki, to be cleansed from this. He gives me someone who speaks in between Yishtabach and Baruch Hu, Averu, Hu biyado, it's an Avera, and for such a transgression, you would not go out to war. They wouldn't let you go out to war. He says, Hari lecha, I will say, the idea is, what does that mean? A person who speaks between Yishtabach and Baruch Hu, that's it. They say to him in the army, because also it's referring to the fact that when they would go out to war, so remember again, the Kohen Mashuach Melchama, he would go ahead and say, Mi hayore varach alevav, who's afraid? So the Gemara Dash is afraid of what? Afraid of Averos. So now the Gemara is saying, what's an example of an Avera that you have to be afraid of? Speaking between Yishtabach and Baruch Hu. And right? And if you did that, don't go out to battle. You can imagine, we wouldn't have an army. If you get an army, you wouldn't get a minion. Right? If that's it. But the idea that Chazal are trying to express to us is how deep the midah of Nikios goes. That the goal of Nikios, literally again, is even the things that we say that are small things, little things. The goal is still to get rid of them from within my life. That's the goal. I'm not there yet, but that's my goal. He says, Vihine, this is very profound. This is going to introduce the next part, Sunday Shir. The same way they were speaking about the midah of Nikios when it comes to actions, there's also Nikios by midos, by character traits. And I will say, the Rachel writes, it's so much harder to achieve Nikios in midos, in one's character traits, than it is to achieve midos in one's behaviors. Incredible. We know this. Changing behaviors, I could do relatively quickly. Changing my midos, that's a lifetime's worth of work. Like everybody say, you can start learning, right? Another hour a day. You want to change your behavior, or you want to stop doing a certain thing. It takes time, but totally doable. Behavioral modification is absolutely achievable. Changing who you are, changing your midos, changing your character traits, changing how you respond to things, that's tough work. He goes on, Ki ateva, Paul b'midos, Yosher Mashu Paul b'maisim. Because we'll say one's nature comes out more in his behaviors, in his midos, than it does in his actions. Ya'an, hamezek v'atchune heim o mesayim o misnagdim gidolim lahem. Therefore, I will say, my almost innate disposition, right? My mezeg means like my temperature, or is my innate disposition, and my tchuna, right? Really, which means my disposition. So ultimately, again, sometimes they can help with my midos, or ultimately go against my midos. We'll say there are some people who are naturally nice. They just have a predisposition to be nice. So such a person like that has a much easier time with midos tovos versus someone who has a predisposition towards anger, which absolutely happens. Person like that has a much more difficult time with midos. B'chol milchama. So we'll say, so here what he's saying over here is like this. So up until now, we've been speaking about Nikios as it manifests itself in an actional fashion in my behaviors. There's a whole nother realm of Nikios, which has to do with my midos, with my behaviors. The Ramchal says, you thought it was tough until now. Wait, because the truth is, changing and modifying behaviors is something that is within reach of all of us. Changing and modifying behaviors, my behaviors are often a reflection of my natural dispositions, of my innate proclivities of my innate identity, and therefore changing my midos often requires me to what? Change my very core. Change my very core. And the Ramchal says, V'chol milchama she neged nitiyas hateva. Now that's a war against nature. When I will say a war against nature, we're talking about my personal nature. A war against my personal nature, it's big stuff. He says, milchama chazakihi. That's a tough battle to wage. V'huma shepershu ma'amar zechron levracha, ezehu gibar. We'll say, what is the greatest manifestation of strength? Hakovesh es Yisro. One who is able to rein in his desires, proclivities, and wants. So Rabbi say this is really an incredible idea. So we've been talking about the war that one has to wage against their actions. The Ramchal says, but the war you have to wage to create proper midos even harder. Because Rabbi say, if you think about this, and it's interesting to see, because if you think about for yourself, what are your negative character traits? Don't yell it out. Right, Rabbi say, what are your negative character traits? And if you think about it, by the way, those negative character traits are often a manifestation of certain innate qualities that I have. And I will say, there are many innate qualities that are not good. That are not good. Hashem created me that way, but He created me that way to fight against it. So I have certain behaviors which are manifestations of certain innate qualities. Now I will say, it's easier for a person to say, this is who I am. Love it or leave it. Right? So that's laziness. That's laziness. When a person says, love it or leave it, this is my identity, that's it. That's lazy. That's atzlos. That's atzlos. Nikios demands, what midos do I have that are not good? And I have to change them. And even though changing them means changing my core, changing my nature, that's a battle that has to be waged. Let's finish off. V'hinei hamidos hein rabos, ki k'fi ha'polo shayacham la'adam ba'olam. Both say there are many different midos that we have in this world. Kemo kein midos hein. Just like there are many different actions, there are many different midos. Shacharein hu nimshach ba'pulosav. And I will say, here's the chap. If you could change your midos, and I will say, then what? Then you change your actions. Because often the way we act is a reflection of the midos that we possess. You see, I will say, sometimes the reason why behavior modification doesn't work, we try to change behaviors, but yet we can't change the behavior, is because we're not attacking the issue at the core. A lot of times when I engage in negative behaviors, those negative behaviors are reflection of negative midos. So we try to change behaviors. But if you change behaviors without changing midos, it's very hard to get traction. The reason we often try to change behaviors without changing midos is because deep down I know that to change a midah often requires me to alter my teva, to alter my nature. And I'm not ready to do that. I'm ready to modify behaviors. That I'm ready to do. But to actually change my nature by altering my midos, that I'm not ready to do. But I both say, but often again, that's why when we try to affect change in life, we don't get traction in the change because we're not affecting change at the core, right? At the nerve center, which are my midos and my teva. If all I attack, if all I deal with are behaviors, I'm not really affecting cathartic change. But if I'm willing to be brave enough to enter into the world of midos and really look at myself, a real look at myself, what character traits do I have that are negative? And what does that represent about certain innate qualities or proclivities or predispositions? And I'm willing to acknowledge those, and I'm willing to work on those. Then not only do I change my behaviors, not only do I change my midos, I end up changing my behaviors, and I end up changing my life. Rabbi, we'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach, what a way to end the week. We're to be continued on Sunday. A good Chodesh.